We are beginning tonight's Shiur in the beginning of Siman Kuf Lamed Tes, which is the last line on page Chaf Aleph. We're about to turn on to page 42. Siman Kuf Lamed Tes says Seder Kriyas HaTorah U'Birchoseh, the order of the laning and the brachos. A very important siman if you want to know what's going on by Kriyas HaTorah. So the Mechaber says in Chaf Aleph, B'mokom shenagu sha'ola atzmo korei b'kol ram. In a place where the minhag is that the one who gets the aliyah reads from the Torah, as we've discussed, was the minhag in the olden days. Im lo sider tchila ha-parsha pa'amayin v'shalosh beino levein atzmo. If he has not gone over the parsha 2 or 3 times by himself, he didn't prepare lo yalla, he cannot go up for the aliyah and read from the Torah because he's unprepared. The Ramah says, U'v'mokom sha'chazan korei, in a place where they have the minhag like we do nowadays, that there's a balkorei that lanes for everyone. So who tzarech l'sader tchila? So then it's the balkorei who has to prepare for it before. So whoever's going to be doing the laning, whether it's the one getting the aliyah or the balkorei, either way they have to prepare 2 or 3 times before they go up. Says the Mishna Berura in Sivkoton Aleph on page 42. We said if you do not go over it 2 or 3 times, lo yalla, do not go up for your aliyah. Hainu. That means to say, afal pi shekara'u lalos, even though you got called up for an aliyah, but if you're unprepared, don't go up. Va'amru chazal perakaroah. So even though they called you up, and the Gemara tells us in Brachos, shlosha dvarim mekatzrim yomav shel adam. 3 things shorten the life of a person. The echad nehen misha nosen lo sefer Torah likros eino korei. One is a person who was given a sefer Torah to read from it. He doesn't read from it. So to not go up when you're called for an aliyah is very serious business. It's mekatzrin yamav shel adam. But still, hacha lo yalla, here if you're unprepared, you should not go up. Shetzarich mitchila lesader beino levein atzmo. You must prepare before on your own, chazer over the laning before you go up. And even though it's mekatzrim yamav shel adam, if you're unprepared, you don't go up. The asmuchu chachamim akra, and the chachamim were so mech this idea on a pasuk t'ksiv. It says in Iyov, Oz ra'a vayisapra hechina v'gam chakara. It's talking about Hashem when he's giving the Torah. Hashem saw and he said over, he prepared and he analyzed. And the next pasuk says, V'omar lo'adam. And then he said to man. So we see he had 4 forms of preparation, 4 chazaras before he said over the Torah to man. And the Mefarshim ask over here, if the pasuk is referring to 4 expressions of chazar that Hashem did, why does the Mechaber say that you shouldn't go up to read from the Torah unless you prepare 2 or 3 times? Where does 2 or 3 come from? If the smachas in the pasuk that says 4 lashonos, it should really be 4. Says the Mishna Berura Vaitis of Kotan Bais. Hu tzarech. The Ramah told us in a place where the balkorei is laning for everyone, he's the one that must be mesader the parsha first. U'b'di'evid im ein sham bebeis haknesses misha sider li'atzmo mitchila. B'di'evid, if there's no one in shul who's prepared, and we've all been to shuls that no one prepared the laning, kedei shelo levatel kriya b'tzibur, in order that we should not cancel the kriya in the tzibur. No hagim lahakel sheyikra echad sheyodei l'nagin hata'amim. So the minhag is that we're lenient, that we allow someone who is generally familiar with the trap to do the laning, afal pi shelo sider, even though he's unprepared. The korin lefanav balachash mitoch hachumish o hasider, and we have someone standing next to him, as we know, who reads it to him quietly, and then he repeats it with the trap properly. The ayin lekama b'simen kuf membeis and Mishna Berura mashenichla bazeh. Sivkoton Gimel Tchila. Again, the Ramah said in a place where there is a balkorei, he needs to be mesader Tchila. Umitzah min hamuvchar shegam ha'ola yisader Tchila beino levein atzmo. Says the Mishna Berura, even in a place where there's a balkorei, if you're going to be getting an aliyah, and I guess if you're aware you're getting an aliyah, you should also prepare yourself. Ubishnayim mikra shekara be'erev Shabbos yotzei. And if you did Shnai Mikra on Erev Shabbos, that's good enough. Ki nechsha b'cheshbon asider, that counts towards the cheshbon of preparation for the laning. If you look in the Sha'ar Tzion, Oz Bais, he writes, V'al kain tov she be'erev Shabbos yikra Shnai Mikra v'chatargum. And therefore, since we never know when we're going to call up for an aliyah, so then one should certainly be prepared, and Erev Shabbos he should do Shnai Mikra v'chatargum. Pen yikra'u l'mocher lalos haTorah, because he might get an aliyah the next day on Shabbos. This way he will be prepared. Says the Mechaber Vaitis Bais. Misha eino yodea likros, one who does not know how to read from the Torah. Tzorech limchos biyado shelo yala la sefer Torah. You must protest against him going up for an aliyah and reading from the Torah if he doesn't know how to read it. And if we need this person who doesn't know how to lane, lefishu Kohen or Levi, because this person happens to be a Kohen or a Levi, the Ein Sham Acher Zulaso, there's no other Kohen or Levi in the shul. So even though he doesn't know how to read from the Torah, but we need him for the Aliyah. So yikra lo shliat tzibur mila b'mila. If when the Baal Koreh is reading to him, word for word, Yodea lo omra v'lekrosa min aksav, he's able to follow along and to read it from the ksav by hearing it from the Baal Koreh, then yochol lalos, then he can go up for the Aliyah. V'im lav lo yala, if not, he should not go up for the Aliyah. So the Mechaber says in Sef Beis, one who does not know how to read, you have to protest before he gets an Aliyah. But if he's needed because he's a Kohen or a Levi, so then it depends. If he's able to follow along with the Chazan and read it inside the Sefer Torah, so then he can go up. If not, he cannot go up. Says the Mishnah Berura of Katan Dalet, Tzarech Limchos, you protest against him. Mitoch divrei ha-mechaber muchaf. From the words of the Mechaber over here, it is clear. Da'afilu im yochol likros im ashliat tzibur mila b'mila mitoch haksav. Even if the person is able to read it along with the Chazan word for word in the ksav, Gam kein ein likroso. You still should not call him up. Kevin sheyochol likro lacher. Since you can call someone else up. The Mechaber says if there's no one else and he can read it mila b'mila, then it's okay. Mashma, but if there's someone else, even if you can read it mila b'mila, it's not okay. That is clear from the Shulchan Aruch. Avol, however, midivrei haTorah l'kamam b'simen kuf mem aleph v'chein mishuvas harosh shuva sham Beis Yosef mashma diyesh lahakal bazeh. From the Torah, from the Tshuvas HaRosh, as word in the Beis Yosef, it is mashma that you can be lenient and you can call up, even if there are others, to one who is able to read along word for word with the Baal Koreh from the Ksav. Ubeprat lefi mashakasa b'Siv Gimel b'Shem Ma'aril. Specifically, lefi what we're going to see in Siv Gimel shortly b'Shem the Ma'aril, b'vadai ein lahachmir b'zeh, you certainly shouldn't be machmir. The Ma'aril is the one who says in the second to last line of the page over here, on the upstairs in the Ramah, umaril kosav da'alshav korei suma. He says nowadays we call a suma up for an aliyah. We'll get to that in a moment. But Zakta Mishnah Berura over here, besides the fact that the Torah and the Beis Yosef brings in the Tshuvas HaRosh, you could call someone up who could read word for word. So certainly, lefi this Ramah who brings the Maril, certainly one should not be machmir. Sivkoton hey lo yala. We said if he can't read word for word from the Ksav, he should not go up for the aliyah. You're not allowed to read even one os, not from the Ksav of the Sefer Torah. Look at the Ramah that we're going to see shortly in Sev Gimel, that our minhag is to be lenient, even if you can't read it from the Ksav, that it's going to be okay, but that is the Shita of the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber weiter in Sev Gimel. Afilu Rosh HaKnesses o Chazon lo yikra ad sheyomru lo kra. Even the Rosh HaKnesses, so the Chazan is like the Shamish in this case. The Rosh HaKnesses is someone who is in a position of leadership in the shul. Even these two people who have positions of leadership, they should not go up and read from the Torah until they are asked to. However, the Shliat Tzibur, which over here is referring to the Baal Koreh, if he wants to go make the bracha and take the aliyah for himself, he can do it without getting permission. Because the fact that they appointed him to be the Shliat Tzibur, to be the Baal Koreh, it's ki'ilu they gave him permission that if he chooses to make the bracha on a given aliyah, that he can in fact take that aliyah. The Ramah says, "The medinos elu eino hagim kain." In our medinos, that is not the minhag. The eina chazan ola rakesh askan omer lalos. Here in the Ramah, the chazan is the same as the Shliat Tzibur of the Mechaber, but the chazan, meaning the Shliat Tzibur, meaning the Baal Koreh, should not take the aliyah unless the skan, which is the gabbai, calls him up for the aliyah. Aval ein koren lo bishmo kamo sh'ar ha'olim shekoren osam bishmam ploni bar ploni. But when you call him up the Baal Koreh for an aliyah, as we'll see in the Mishnah Berura, since he's standing up there already, you don't need to call him up by his name as you call up other aliyahs, ploni bar ploni. Then the Ramah says, Misha oviv mumar lavodos kochavim, the person whose father lo aleinu went off and he is a mumar lavodah zara. So koren oso b'shem avi oviv. When you call up the son for the aliyah, you don't call him up ben his father. We don't want to mention his father's name. You call him b'shem his grandfather. Avalo b'shmo levad. But don't just call the son up by the son's name without ben something. We say ben, but we say the name of the grandfather instead of the father. Why don't we just say his name without any ben? Shelo levaisho b'rabim. So we shouldn't embarrass him in public. Everyone gets called up a certain way. If we just say his name without any ancestor's name, that would be embarrassing. Therefore, we replace his father, who's the mummer, with his grandfather. That's only if he never got an aliyah with his father's name. He's a new bar mitzvah boy, he never got called up, or he's new in town, he never got called up by his father's name. Avalim hu gadol, but if he's already older, v'hurgul ba'usa ha'ir lalos b'shem aviv, and everyone knows his name already, he got called up many times, Ben, his father's name, and then the Hamir Oviv Lavodas Gochav, and then his father goes off to become worshipping Avodah Zarah. So Korem also b'shem Oviv Kamosha Hurgel. Since everyone knows his name anyway, as that, it would be embarrassing to change it, so you continue calling him up b'shem Ben Oviv. Shalol Levaisho B'Rabim, so we should not embarrass him in public. And so too, if the father is a powerful person, this mummer, and we're afraid of him, that would be also grounds to continue calling up the son b'shem his father, the mummer. Someone who was, as a baby, was brought in from the shuk, and we don't know who his father is. So koren oso b'shem avi imo. So then we call him up by the name of his mother's father. V'im eno yadua. If it is not known who his mother's father is, so koren oso, we don't know who his mother is, koren oso b'shem Avraham. Then we call him up ben Avram kimo lager, just like we do by a convert. Then the Mechaber says, Suma eno kore, the Suma cannot get an aliyah. Lefi sha'asar likros afilu os achas shalom min aksav. You're not allowed to read even one letter, not min aksav. Obviously, a blind person can read from the ksav, and therefore he can't be called up. Says the Ramah. Umaril kasav the arshav kore Suma, like we saw before, the Maril says that nowadays we do call up a blind person for an aliyah. Kamosh anu makrin batorah la'am haaretz. Same way we call up an am haaretz who can't read from the ksav. We also call up a blind person who can't read from the ksav. Now let's go back to the Mishna Berura, beginning in Sivkoton Vav. Afilu Rosh HaKnesses. Again, the Mechaber started off and said that even the Rosh HaKnesses or the Chazan can't start reading without getting permission from the Tzibur. The Kol Shekain Adam the Alma, certainly a regular person who doesn't have any position of leadership, he can't just go up and start leaning. The reason is the Ein Roi Sheyachlok Adam Kavod Atzmo. It's not proper for a person to be grabbing covet for himself. If someone wants to give it to you, fine, but you can't go grab it for yourself. V'od, another reason is the lolesi linsuya. People shouldn't come and start fighting. Shekol echad yaktim atzvu. Everyone's going to try to go beat out the other person and grab it for themselves. As they cause fighting, they're running after covet, inappropriate, and therefore even these people who have a position of leadership, the Rosh HaKnesses or the Chazan who is a Shamish, they can't go up to read from the Torah unless they are asked to. Sivkotan Zayin is going on the Mechaber that says that the minhag is that the Shlat Tzibur, who's the Baal Korei, if he wants to make the bracha, he can do it without permission, because it's Ki'ilu when they appointed him to the Baal Korei, they gave him Rishus to make the bracha when he wants the Aliyah as well. Says the Mishna Berura, Shiur Haloshen Keinu. This is what the Mechaber means to say. Mishum dahavi ki'ilu hirshu al kach. It's as if they gave him permission for this. Misha sheminu l'shlat tzibur, when they appointed him to be the shlat tzibur, when they appointed him to be the Baal Korei. Ubebeis Yosef muvur Yoser, and the Beis Yosef explains it further. The kevan the alshav nuhogim shal shlat tzibur hu hakorei b'mekom ha'olim. Since nowadays the Baal Korei is the one who is reading the laning in the place of those who get the aliyah. Im kain, if so, kevan shirshu leo shlat tzibur, since they gave him permission to be the Baal Korei. Harei hirshu likros b'Torah. They gave him permission to read from the Torah. Umistama lo kaptim mivarak amkein. And mistama, we assume they're not makbid if he makes the bracha as well. Achareisha belav hochiu akorei. Anyway, he's reading from the Torah. So mistama, they give him permission to take the aliyah. He does not need to be called up. Lefi the Mechaber. The Ramah said in our Medinos that is not the minhag, and even he must get called up from the skan. Ein karno b'shmo. The only thing we said is that when the Gabbai calls him up, he doesn't call him up by his name. And the reason for that, the Mishna Berura says in Sivkoton Ches, Keivan shu omed sham, since he's there already, he does not have to be called up by name. Sivkoton Tes is going on the Ramah that told us that a person who has a father who is a mummer, we should not call him up by his father's name. So rather we call him up by his grandfather's name, unless he was already known by his father's name previously, so then we'll call him up by his father's name, even though he's now a mummer. Shalol Vaisha Berabim, says the Mishna Berura, Mikom Makom lo yomar ta'orim al oviv. But still, if you're calling up B'Shem his father, no titles for his father. K'mo chaver omarenu ki ein lomar sheker. You can't say sheker. The guy's the mumar lavodah zara. You can't start giving him some nice titles. Rak yomar bechipazon lebli yargishu ha'am. You just say the father's name quickly, so no one even notices it or feels it. Just quickly say his name, so he shouldn't be embarrassed. He should be called the normal way, but a less focus on the father's name. V'davka ba'osa ha'ir. But again, even if he was called up previously by his father's name, and now he's the mumar, you continuously call him up if he is known that way in this city. But if he comes to a new city, and they ask him for his name for an aliyah in a new place, Yomar Shem Avi Ovid. Then he should say the name of his grandfather. Now, why would you have any havamina that he should give any name of chashivas to his father if he's a mumar? So if you look at note number 6, the second paragraph, a very lamaisa point. When one gets called up to an aliyah and they ask him his father's name, you're really not supposed to say your father's name. So Hora, Gon Rav Yashiv, and Rabbi Sion Abasho, they both paskin Sheyomar ben Rebbe Ploni. You call your father Rebbe Ploni. You don't just say your father's name. You're not supposed to say your father's name. You say Rebbe Ploni. You give him a title. V'chein kosav pischei tshuva in Yeredeya. Shebemokom atzorech muter leben lomar. In a time of need, a son can say Ben Rebbe Ploni ani. I am the son of Rebbe Ploni. He can say his father's name by adding a title before the name of his father. What about when the Gabbai is calling his father up for an aliyah? So the note continues and says, Gabbai mala es aviv. When the Gabbai is calling up his father, the Shalom Shuvas Eretz Tzvi says, Sheyomer Yamod Avi Mori Ploni Ben Ploni. You say Avi Mori, and then you say your father's name, then your grandfather. Ulam, however, Rav Yashiv and Rabbi Sion Abashol argue, and they paskin Sheyomer Rak Yamod Avi Mori below Lahaskir Shmo. You skip the name totally. You just say Yamod Avi Mori, and that's it. You don't say your father's name when you are the Gabbai. Says the Mishnah Berura Vaitus of Katan Yud B'Shem Avi Imo. We said if you have the Shtukir Asufi and you don't know who the father is, so you call him up B'Shem, his grandfather from his mother's side. Umayri Shabbos Achas Kodem Shenesaf Min Ashuk. We're talking about a case where a woman came before he was gathered in from the shuk, and she said this was her child. V'amra Shehi Imo, and she said that she was the mother. V'ayim b'taz shedaito. Look in the Taz, whose opinion is the ein lekrosa b'shem ben Avram. The yesh lekrosa b'shem ben Avram. You shouldn't call up the shtukir asufi b'shem his mother's father, but rather call him up b'shem ben Avram. U'b'chai adam gam kein kosa shizel yoser nachol. The Chai Adam says that's more correct. Why is that better? Why is it better to say ben Avram than to call him up b'shem his mother's father? So if you look at note 80, points out b'tama davar kosav. She'im yikra'u b'shem avi imo, you're going to call a person up by the shame of his grandfather, his mother's father. Shema yavo l'garish es ishto b'shem zeh. Maybe lo aleinu, one day he'll get divorced, and he's going to write in the get the name that he was always called up as an aliyah, which is b'shem his grandfather. V'nimtza get batul, and it's not a good get because that's not his father's name. The get's batul. Sharelu mishbechosam lebeis avosam ksiv. The pasuk says that your yichus goes by your father's house, not by your mother's house. So if he's going to be trained to get an aliyah b'shem his mother's father, he might use that name for other things like a get, and that would be big trouble. Says the Mishnah Berura Vaitus of Katan Yud Aleph. V'im eino yadua. The Ramah said that even though, not like we saw just now in the Achronim, but you call up normally a shtuki asufi b'shem as Avi Imo, but if it's not known the name of his grandfather, then we call him b'shem Avram, like a ger. Says the Mishnah Berura, Shem Avi Imo, v'im eino yodua Shem Avi Imo. If we don't know his mother's father's name, kohen oso b'shem ben Avram, we call him up b'shem ben Avram, al shem hakosav, based on the pasuk that says, ki av hamon goyim nesaticha, that Avram was called the av hamon goyim when he had the hey added to his name, so he's the father of everyone, and therefore you can always be called up ben Avram. Sivkoton Yud Beis, the Arshav Korei Suma. The Ramah brought this famous Maharil that we keep quoting. The Maharil writes, the Akshav Korei Suma. Nowadays we call it a Suma. The Taimo, the reason of the Maharil is the Kevan Sho'onu Nuhagim Shashatzibur Korei. Since our minhag is that there's a Bal Korei who lanes, V'hu Korei Mitoch Aksav, Shuv Lo Kapdin Al Ha'olah. Since the Bal Korei is reading it from the Sefer Torah, we're not makbid on the one who gets the aliyah. The Shomea Ka'ona, when you hear it, it's like you're saying it, and therefore you can call it basuma, you can't read it, but hearing it is like saying it, so it's good enough for him to hear it from the Bal Korei, and that is why the Maharil says a suma can be called up. Sifkatan Yud Gimel is going on the last point of the Ramah. that says the reason why the Maril says you can call it Basuma is Kamosha Anu Makrim Batorah La'Ma'aretz, just like we call it La'Ma'aretz. It says in Mishabura, it's a Lomar, Sha'onu Nuhagim Lahakil Afilum Eino Yachal Likros Mashiach Tzivur Milim Milim B'Toch Aksav. We are lenient, we are knowing to be lenient, that even if he doesn't know how to read along with the Shiat Tzibur word for word Mitoch Aksav, we still call him up. V'al Korachel Mitam Anal, and obviously the reason is, like we said before, because of Shomea Ka'oneh. V'hu Adin Basuma, and therefore the Ramah is saying Hu Adin Basuma. Uladin Halach L'Maisa Kfar Kosu Achronim D'Nogul Hakal Kamaril. The Achronim made it right. The minog is to be lenient like the Maril. Umikom Mokom LeParshas Para UParshas Zachar Nochon Shelo LeKros and LeChatchila. However, when it comes to Parshas Para and Parshas Zachar, it's proper not to call up a blind person LeChatchila. If you look in the Shar Tzion Ozvav, he explains a very interesting thing. The din zeh shel Maharil Kfar Kosav Adarchei Moshe b'Simin Kuf Lamed Hey b'Simin Kuf Mem Aleph Shelo Niralo. It's interesting, here the Ramah, who also wrote the Darchei Moshe, the Ramah brings the Maril over here, but in his other Sefer, the Darchei Moshe, he says about the Maril Shelo Niralo, he's not masking to the Maril. It's interesting, the Ramah brings him over here, but the Darchei Moshe does not mask him. Bein b'Suma, bein b'Amaretz, he doesn't agree not by a Suma, not by an Amaretz. Im Eino Yochel Likros Mashatz, the Amaretz is such an Amaretz that he can't read along with the Chazan, so the Ramah was not masking him in the Darchei Moshe. Interesting. The Ramah was mavatal as das. L'maisa the minig evolved to follow the Maril. So therefore, even though the Ramah stayed on Darchei Moshe, he's not masking, in the Ramah he brought it down because l'maisa people are knowing that way. V'lochein, therefore says the Shar Tzion, but Parshas Para sheyesh omer shi daraisa. By Parshas Para, which some say is daraisa, ubet prat b'zachar, and specifically by Parshas Zachar, the l'kuli alma hi daraisa. Everyone agrees Parshas Zachar is daraisa. Nachon lizar bazeh, and those two parshas for sure you should be careful about this. Umatzasi shekain kosav gamkem b'shari Ephraim l'inyan suma. Upashat u'adin l'inyan ma'oretz she'eni yochel likus u'mashas b'toch aksav. So therefore the same thing would apply again by Asuma and Amaretz who carry b'toch aksav. Asher Magen Avraham hetek b'sif aleph. Even though Magen Avraham began in Sukkot and Aleph, b'shem ha'masas Binyamin lahokel b'Amaretz, v'lin b'Amaretz, le'inyan parshos elu b'vadi nachon lahachmir. When it comes to Parshas Para, Parshas Zachar, for sure you should be machmir. We end with one interesting point, and that is, the Mishnah Berura explained very nicely the Maril. The reason why the Maril says you can call a blind person is because since we have a Balkori reading it from inside the Ksav, Shomea Ka'oneh, so what's the tzad that Darchei Moshe has an issue with that, and why isn't he masking? So if you look at note 14 on the next page on the bottom, he points out to Mash she'ein omrim bazeh Shomea Ka'oneh, the tzad that the Ramah would argue and would not want to say Shomea Ka'oneh like the Maril, Kosa b'shal juva shelas yavitz, sha'yidei Shomea Ka'oneh eino nershav k'korei mitoch aksav. It's true Shomea Ka'oneh. It makes it that his words are your words, but you have to read it mitoch aksav. So his words are your words, but l'maisi you're not reading mitoch aksav, and that takes us back to the famous machlokes that we had, the Briskarav and the Bais Halevi and the Chazon Ish. Exactly how does Shomea Ka'oneh works? Is whatever the person does that says that it's Mesiachas you, you did everything, or is it only his words are your words? L'char, that's the machlokas over here. That's hard to say that Shomea Ka'oneh won't work over here. Is if it's just his words are my words, but it's not my words mitoch haksah, so it's not going to be good. But if you say everything that he did, Shomea Ka'oneh says Ki'ilu I did everything. So even though the person is blind, it's Ki'ilu the blind person read mitoch haksah, because that's the other understanding of Shomea Ka'oneh. We will stop here and continue weiter Mitzvah Shem next time with Siv Dalet.